What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 131, and I'm the co-host Kyle Anslone, joined by the co-host Will Porter. Will, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great, Kyle. How you doing on this 4th of July?
Well, it's Independence Day, so of course that means there's tons of propaganda, mainly supporting more money being poured into the military industrial complex. And then everybody salutes their warplanes and big, aircraft carriers and everything like that. And I never know whether to laugh or cry at the irony, but I try to just get through the day, enjoy it, maybe have some nice barbecue or something like that. But it's very hard to take these propaganda days seriously that the empire inserts in our calendar every year, and sometimes it seems like it almost becomes Christmas level theatrics, and
Yeah.
so that's what we're going through right here, Will. But you got anything going on? Anything exciting happening?
No, just, hanging out. It's a Sunday, normal Sunday for me.
Right on, dude. All right. Well, everybody share the show. You can find it at the Libertarian Institute. The URL is libertarianinstitute.org/Kyle, and that'll give you a full archive of the show. All 130 episodes. We got interviews with Dave DeCamp and Scott Horton and Danny Sherjan of antiwar.com. Also, Connor Freeman and Patrick McFarlane of the Libertarian Institute, and just tons of other great content. You could go back and look at what me and Will were talking about. We're almost always right, and so you could go back and see oh, Kyle and Will were saying this is probably gonna happen or be the result of this policy, and you can see it turn out. So definitely check out the archive and the Institute. Also, you can find the show video versions at YouTube and Odysee. We post it on the blog at antiwar.com. We share the show on our social media accounts, Twitter, Facebook, and MeWe. And you could give us money at Patreon or Subscribestar. You could get some great CBD products and support the show by doing your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde. The URL is palomaverdecbd.com. And when you use the promo code PEACE, you'll get 25% off orders of $75 or more. And they have just a great lineup of products. Will, I'm always telling people about how much I like the topicals, particularly the sports cream, but I know you're a fan of some of their other products, so talk about what your favorites are.
Yeah, I actually got a little sample of the salve recently that I do want to try, but my favorite stuff are their soft gels, the melatonin soft gels. They recently just put out like a new formulation of those, and I love them. They're great for if you just want to, relax and unwind at night. I have trouble sleeping, so that helps me with that. They've also got, these high dose oil tinctures that I really like. So if that stuff interests you, and Paloma Verde has all kinds of educational resources. They got lab results. If you want to see any of that stuff or their great lineup of products, check out palomaverdecbd.com.
All right. Well, the first story we want to talk about today is one you actually wrote up, and it's on our least favorite war criminal, Eddie Gallagher. And this guy was a Navy SEAL who served during the fight to get rid of ISIS in Iraq. And during that time, he was accused not only by civilians or human rights groups, third party observers, but rather by his own squad mates that he was committing war crimes and doing some pretty terrible stuff. So Will, he ends up kind of through Trumpian politics, I guess, of, we support our military and our military could commit whatever war crimes they want, and that's not a big deal. So he ends up, getting off with this. But now, as I guess, as a free man, he's made some interesting statements on a podcast. And to be honest, Will, to me, it almost revealed a bigger crime than just the simple murder that he committed. So tell us what's going on here.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, like you said, this Gallagher guy, I think the main thing, he was accused of quite a few different allegations, but the main thing was that he had fatally stabbed this 17-year-old Iraqi prisoner in the throat during the Battle of Mosul. And this prisoner was alleged to be an Islamic State fighter. He was ultimately acquitted for all the things he was accused of. He was also accused of shooting at civilians at other, during another incident. He was also accused of posing for photographs with this kid's corpse, which definitely did happen. The photos are out there. And in fact, that is the one thing that he was sentenced for. He was actually convicted for taking photos with this kid's body and sending those photos to his buddies and stuff. However, the sentence for that was only 4 months, so he did end up getting time served and he was, released. You mentioned, Trump had sort of intervened in his case. It was kind of a crazy case overall. Just there was a lot of twists and turns in it. At one point, one of the main witnesses had suddenly changed their story and said that he and not Gallagher had actually killed this teenage kid. Even though that same guy, that same squad member, had previously told investigators that Gallagher was sort of unhinged and that he was, quote, perfectly okay with killing anything that moved. And so Gallagher, though, he's insisted all along that like all his accusers are liars and traitors and weak millennials. He just recently put out a book where he's characterizing them like that. However, like you mentioned a couple months ago, back in May, he went on this podcast called The Line, and he gave like a very different version of events that effectively he's basically admitting that he and his unit had killed this kid on purpose, in one way or another. He still claims that he didn't stab the kid, but he now says that they knew the prisoner was going to die anyway, so that they practiced medical procedures on him until he did die, which apparently included jamming a breathing tube into his throat, just for practice, which, to me sounds kind of like stabbing somebody in the throat with something, if it's just sort of not a necessary procedure. But he said a few other things too. He said that he thought the Iraqis would have tortured the kid to death had he wound up in their custody, which isn't super implausible. Like the Iraqis are known for torturing detainees, and the U.S. has sort of tacitly approved that for years now. However, Gallagher was trying to frame this sort of as like an act of mercy, that like, the kid would have been tortured, even though at the same time he was simultaneously saying that they didn't actually deliberately kill him, he would have died anyway, and that none of like the procedures, the medical procedures they did on him, like sped up his death. He claims all of these things simultaneously. So doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like the whole story doesn't seem to add up, but there certainly is different from what he was saying before. I don't believe he had mentioned practicing these field medic procedures on the kid until he died. Now, he also tried to implicate some of his unit, too, like some of his own accusers, saying that the kid was, quote, killed by us and that nobody at the time had a problem with it. So he's trying to say that, like, we all kind of, knew this was happening. We were all cool with it. It wasn't just me. So nonetheless, you'd think that, like, some of this kind of admission might have some kind of consequence, even just some kind of investigation it might trigger or something. But you would be wrong, because last week the military came out and said that they are not going to take any action on this. They're not going to, investigate further and sort of case closed on it. I mean, even before he had gone on that podcast, it seemed like there's pretty good reason to think that he had done something to this kid. Like you had mentioned, there's a lot of testimony against him from fellow SEALs who had said that Gallagher is evil and toxic and that he wanted to, quote, kill anybody he could while he was out overseas. And it's kind of rare for like special operators to break ranks and speak out against their own like that. So it seemed to me like their claims had some weight. Yeah. But ultimately, though, this guy gets off with time served, and now it seems for sure that he's not going to face any other legal problems for any of the stuff he did in Iraq. Even after seemingly admitting to doing this. And we were talking a couple weeks ago about Ilhan Omar talking about the International Criminal Court and asking, like, where do people go for accountability? And this is why people think there needs to be an ICC, is because like the U.S. insists that it has all its own mechanisms to investigate this kind of stuff. But there seems to be no actual will to do that, even when the soldiers are like admitting they do these things. And I mean, why would there be will to do that? This could only make the U.S. government and military look bad. So the people at the top have no real reason to not push this under the rug. And so that seems to be what happened with this Gallagher case. It's sort of just par for the course for war crimes allegations in Iraq and Afghanistan and during the terror war, that this stuff just gets gets ignored.
Yeah. So, Will, I actually thought that the things that he said on this podcast were really more provocative than the initial claims. And while in a way this indicts parties far higher up the ladder than Gallagher himself, this is pretty disturbing what you have here. And it's the kind of thing that if it were happening, like, imagine, well, we have Gaddafi soldiers here, and they performed needless medical experiments on somebody until they died. That sounds like war propaganda. That sounds like something that Hillary Clinton or Susan Rice would be repeating on the mainstream media in order to scare Americans into war. Or even worse, if they were mercy killing their POWs because the group they were fighting with were even worse and would cruelly torture him to death. Like these are crimes. These are clear war crimes that he is admitting to, and it's to try to like minimize what he apparently did. It's shocking, but it really goes to show that the problem is so much bigger than Eddie Gallagher, right? And it's another thing too, Will, that as we sit here on Independence Day, these are the people in our country that we're supposed to praise and think that are better than us. And here's a guy who, instead of saying like, oh boy, I probably shouldn't be fighting in a war on the side of torturers, people who torture their captured POWs to death. We have the like world, we have morals. Like we believe that there are things like, part of the Geneva Convention on ways that you treat detainees and stuff like that, and torturing them to death isn't a part of that. And so the idea that you would continue to fight and not just, immediately blow the whistle on that is, an indictment of Eddie Gallagher, but the entire, operation against the Islamic State, particularly in Iraq. This is terrible. And it's just amazing to me that, this isn't headline news, that our Navy SEALs are admitting that they were mercy killing the POWs to keep them from being tortured to death. And well, I just appreciate that at least you and your outlet write this up.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I was glad that we paid attention to this one as well. And I mean, like, yeah, it is true. Like there's allegations going back for years and years about Iraqi forces, about what they call the PMS, what's called the Badr Brigade, using like power drills on people and just the most savage kinds of torture against detainees, people believed to be Sunni fighters or whatever. There's all kinds of stuff that the U.S. has sort of tacitly approved and tacitly tolerated. Now, with Gallagher's case in particular, what he said on this podcast, I don't know if some of this is him trying to sort of implicate his other team members more too. He's trying to get back at them for accusing him that like maybe it was more just him stabbing this kid in the neck and that they weren't implicated. But it is kind of telling that the military is not even really going to look into this much. Like whatever preliminary check they did into it apparently wasn't much. They barely put out any information about what they found or what they claimed they couldn't corroborate. So it just seemed like they were pretty eager to brush this under the rug.
All right, well, now we got to talk about another story that is even more shocking that it's not covered in our mainstream press. And that is Trump's war on journalists. His main target, his really the particular target of his war on journalism was Julian Assange, who, for publishing the Iraq war logs, the Afghan war logs, the Gitmo papers, the State Department papers, the documents that Chelsea Manning released, it has been in solitary confinement in a UK prison for over 2 years now, right?
Yeah.
You lose track of time. It's amazing. We've been covering this either on Foreign Policy Focus or Conflicts of Interest all along. And we covered that case. We covered the indictment. But towards the end, Will, this was probably like December, towards the end of the Trump administration, they tacked on this superseding indictment. And while Assange, ultimately the judge ruled that based on his mental health and the cruelty of the UK justice system, he couldn't be extradited to the U.S., but she did accept that everything in the indictments that the U.S. put forward were true. And Assange remains locked up in jail. So this seems pretty critical to me, Will, that we now have a key witness, a part of the superseding indictment, retracting his claims. And so, Will, I know for a lot of people, there's a lot of really hard to pronounce names here, and it's, kind of complicated legal stuff, but I know you got a ton of notes. I know you could break this down for us and explain what got published, what the revelations are, and why this is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, like honestly, I'm still trying to get a grip on all of the implications of this and what it could mean. But this does seem like a massive story. And there is a lot here too. So again, feel free to stop me whenever you want and ask clarification or whatever. But yes, in a nutshell, a key witness against Julian Assange, this guy in Iceland, this Icelandic citizen named Sigurdur Thordarson, very Icelandic name. He has admitted that he completely lied to the FBI and fabricated a lot of claims against Julian Assange. And this guy had volunteered for WikiLeaks between 2010 and 2011. And he was pretty young at the time. He was 17, I think, when he first started volunteering. And if you read through the U.S. indictment against Assange, the superseding indictment, you'll see him referred to in there just as teenager. They don't even use his name. And I think I can kind of see why later once we start getting into who this guy is. And
but Will, just to clarify, he was not a teenager. During the time that this, I don't know, was he a teenager when the alleged incident happened? He definitely isn't a teenager now.
Yeah, definitely. No, he's my age now. I think he's 28. But I believe at the time when he first started speaking and like, volunteering for WikiLeaks, I think he was 17 or 18 years old. And I don't know how it works in Iceland with what they consider a minor or whatever. But I do know that the US indictment for whatever reason does refer to him just as teenager. I don't think they ever use his actual name. Um, Now, again, though, I do think there's some other reason for that too, like beyond just like his actual age. I think they want to conceal his identity a little bit because this guy has been in media reports and has had some unsavory things said about him because he's done some unsavory things. But nonetheless, this indictment cites this Thordarson guy to back up claims against Assange that he was involved in all this hacking and all this criminal activity in Iceland. And they use this Thordarson guy to paint a picture that Assange kind of like pressured him to commit crimes on his behalf. That like because that's kind of what they want to say about Chelsea Manning as well. That Assange kind of coerced or pressured her to leak things and had this list of things that he wanted leaked. And so Thordarson kind of helps them to make that point. It also helps them to give the impression that Assange was first and foremost a criminal and a hacker and not a journalist first and foremost. So that's sort of why he's important to their case, I think. However, a week or two ago, this Icelandic newspaper called Stundin was able to get a hold of Thordarson for an interview, and incredibly, he admitted that a lot of what appears in this indictment against Assange is based on lies that he personally told to the FBI, and he backed up some of what he was saying with like chat logs and stuff. So like he proved some of this to Stundin. And because the Stundin piece is so kind of detailed and really goes into the weeds, like I would urge people to actually go and read it themselves just to get all because it really goes and it knocks down claim by claim by claim. And if you have the superseding indictment pulled up as you read it, you can kind of go through and see how it does knock those down one by one. Um, and so the chat logs, though, that Thordarson provided, they show that he was mostly operating on his own while he was in contact with WikiLeaks. They were not, or Julian Assange was not directing him to do things. It also shows he was constantly inflating and exaggerating his position at WikiLeaks, and that he was talking himself up to other hackers and other hacking groups. And apparently, this is how he originally appeared on the FBI's radar. He was talking to this hacker named Sabu, not knowing that Sabu had become himself an FBI informant. And the feds apparently saw this guy bragging about his connections to WikiLeaks and thought they could maybe use this guy in their case against Assange. Um, and there are a lot of things about this Thordarson guy that would suggest that he's not a very trustworthy character, that even the FBI should have, known and seen. First of all, back in 2015, he was convicted for pedophilia and sexual abuse against 9 teenage boys. And he got like a kind of a weirdly lenient conviction for that or sentence for that. But he was later sentenced for a bunch of financial fraud and stuff too. And in those cases, he had a psychological evaluation done, and they concluded that he was a sociopath, like somebody who just like will lie to your face, like completely, gladly.
Well,
Um,
I
was
had
that?
heard that he was found to be a borderline or possible sociopath, not a socio. Not I don't know what the distinction and the difference is between the two. I hear it's important legally in Iceland as far as like what your sentencing guidelines are. If you are, I guess, a sociopath, then you get a more lenient sentence or something. I don't understand. But the other thing I wanted to ask about was, with this. What wasn't there like $50,000 that was embezzled from WikiLeaks as a part of the financial crimes?
Yes, that was my next thing I was going to get
Oh,
into.
okay. All right. Great. Go ahead.
But yeah. So on top of all this stuff, like just sort of his seedy past, and you may be right. Like I may have oversimplified, or maybe the thing I had read oversimplified, just straight up calling him a sociopath. But it seemed like the psychological evaluation had turned up some stuff that this guy has some kind of atypical thing going on. That would make him okay with doing things like this, like because while he was volunteering and fundraising for WikiLeaks, he had made off with $50,000 in their money. I think from like merchandise money that he had just sent. He had the people send it to his account rather than the WikiLeaks account, something like that. However, him embezzling this money apparently is kind of what led him to approach American authorities in the first place, because he was apparently already on their radar because of contacting. He was in contact with other FBI informants. However, at the time that he approached the U.S. Embassy in Iceland, WikiLeaks staff were trying to locate him because they were trying to find this embezzled money. Um, and it was around that time he contacted the U.S. Embassy in Iceland and said that he has information that could be helpful for a criminal investigation. And already kind of knowing who he was, the FBI, like he quickly became their star witness. Um, and then another thing too, after Thordarson gets in contact with the FBI, it looks like they may have like groomed or coached him to be a better witness for them. There's been some good reporting on this done by The Canary and by Wired. But they've written about how like the feds paid to fly him out for meetings and debriefings on 4 different occasions, putting him up in like nice hotels. At one point, they paid him $5,000 just to just I don't know, as a confidential informant, just to pay him. Um, and so there's a lot of very shady things that seems like possibly happened between this guy and the FBI that they're trying to like groom him into their perfect star witness. And WikiLeaks itself has been aware of this for a while now. Like 2 years ago, they put out a statement in 2019, like calling this all out, saying that the feds are relying on like a convicted con artist and a sexual criminal as their key witness in this case. And not to mention somebody who is a con artist against WikiLeaks itself. So this seems like it could be good news for Assange's case. This guy recanting all of his testimony, saying that all these various allegations that Assange had directed him to hack into these like financial institutions or to hack into Icelandic government institutions and websites, that he's recanted all of this. It seems like that would be good for Assange's case. I don't know exactly how it will work under British law and their extradition rules and stuff, but it does seem like at the very least it would have to deal some kind of blow to the prosecution's case, at least to shake some kind of confidence in their claims. It is definitely one of the most significant developments that I've seen in quite a while on the Assange thing, and I do hope something comes of this.
Yeah, there's one other detail of this story, Will, that seems significant, although maybe more unrelated to Assange. And that was when the FBI initially wanted to approach the pedophile. They were, I guess, rebuffed by the Icelandic government or, intelligence service or whatever. And then the U.S. Pushed a whole bunch of hysteria that there could possibly be cyber crimes in Iceland. And then they were invited in and able to access the pedophile. And so that also seems significant to me, maybe not to Assange in his case necessarily, but to the lengths that the U.S. was willing to go during this time to put Assange behind bars.
Yeah, there definitely was something to that where they were trying to get a hold of this guy, and the FBI, the U.S. authorities had sort of like hyped up a bunch of like allegations of a potential cyber attack. And I believe it was actually the U.S. feds were allowed to go to Iceland and look, but I think it was actually a separate case. Like I think they were called back after the Storderson ended up contacting the embassy, and so they had returned. But yeah, it does seem like they did a lot of underhanded things to build this case overall. And I mean, even dealing with this guy in the first place, and now him recanting all of his allegations, like it just I don't know, it's looking worse and worse and worse for their case. Not that the truth has ever, necessarily mattered to the powers that be. It certainly could just be that they decide to keep him behind bars no matter what. But it would seem that, like, that this would have to do something to his case.
Right. So, well, even ignoring like the First Amendment concerns of this case and everything like that, if you're a prosecutor and the confidential informant that they want to use for the indictment has previously stolen $50,000 from the person that he's now testifying against, don't you think that's a conflict of interest that should be addressed, or the fact that the person has a history of sexual crimes against children? That seems like a big hit to credibility. And then I mean, we should also need now to find out what evidence that were they just going off of his statements? Did they not even ask or look for the chat logs? Because from the way it appears from this article, Will, and what the evidence presented, it seems that there was no reason for the FBI to believe really anything that he was saying. It was just the word of somebody who was being paid by the U.S., who had legal incentive to find a way to skirt justice because he was potentially facing more time in prison. So he had, a personal motive, and he's also stolen from the person whose organization he's now testifying against. All those things to me seem like they would be massive issues if you're trying to use him as a witness in this indictment. And if I were the UK judge and I read this article, I would be completely embarrassed about my ruling, and you would think she would be irate about this, right? So I guess I don't know the UK courts well enough. It seemed that from the the actual extradition hearing that there's no reason to think that the court is going to take any steps really here. But will, if this gets covered at all in the mainstream media and gets all presented the way it should, that this was a part of Trump's war on the media, that he was targeting the First Amendment, that he was using fabricated evidence to target journalists, then that I think that there's a chance that this could be like the PR hit that would cause the Biden administration to go ahead and drop the appeal of the decision by the judge not to indict or extradite Julian Assange, and I guess that's where I see the victory here. It has to be a huge PR victory. People, the most hated people in our country are the pedophiles, and rightfully so. And so when it comes out that you're using a pedophile to try and throw somebody in jail, that's a big black eye. And again, if people find this out, then I think they're going to be outraged. That's why I think it's so important that we're talking about it on today's show. Will, I mean, what am I missing here? What other implications didn't we get into?
No, I think you're absolutely right that like the value of this might not necessarily be that, it might not have any formal effect on the extradition case, in the UK court in the legal system. However, it might deal the sort of PR blow and shake enough confidence in like public confidence in this case that it might give cover for Biden to get rid of it. It seems like he would have a ready-made argument. I think I've explained this in the show before because his prior boss Obama had this whole rationale made up for why they couldn't charge Julian Assange. And Biden only needs to invoke that and say, invoke that against mean old Donald Trump and what his administration did. It would seem like he has a ready-made kind of case, to justify dropping the charges or dropping the case against Julian Assange. But, this hopefully will shake sort of public confidence and maybe, increase some pressure. I know there were like a bunch of like free press and, other NGO type organizations that wrote a big open letter to the Biden administration after it became apparent that they would pursue the case against Assange. And so there are some of these like organizations, civil society groups trying to pressure this. And I hope that this whole, the word bombshell is often used for stories. I would say the Stundin story is a bombshell, and that I hope it does sort of like increase that public pressure.
Yeah. Yep, that's hopefully the result here. Now, one thing I did read, and I think that was in Loria's article I have here from Consortium News, key witness in U.S. case against Assange changes his story. He points out that the superseding indictment was added, and that it may have needed to be there because of the allegations that Thordarson put forward are so outrageous that Assange was telling him to hack the Icelandic government.
Yeah.
That maybe without that, then the judge would have ruled against indict or extradition for several reasons, not just because of Assange's mental health. And so there is that possibility that we need to look into, but it doesn't seem like this is a core part of the indictment or anything like that. It didn't add any new charges, it just added new allegations against Assange. Will, anything else on this? And I mean, this is a huge win for Assange, but again, because it's been so covered up, the mainstream media blackout on this is absolutely unbelievable. Again, this is key. And if this, like the OPCW revelations of the Syrian chemical weapons attack, could be spun as legitimate scandals of the Trump administration, and prior to this, reasons to impeach the president, but now reasons to absolutely tarnish his legacy and make a mockery out of him. And oh my God, can you believe the atrocious things that were happening under the Trump administration? But rather they ignore it because they don't want to deal any kind of PR blow to the U.S. empire. It's just so disgusting.
Yeah, absolutely. We are on the same page.
All right. So let's talk about the extremists, Will, which apparently aren't Eddie Gallagher and the U.S. Justice Department or the UK, who has been holding Julian Assange in solitary confinement, which the UN acknowledges as torture. It is torture. I mean, anybody, I think John Kiriakou said it well, you're about in a space the size of a parking spot. So go stand in a parking spot and then, imagine four walls four walls and a ceiling around you, and you're only allowed to leave an hour a day for unending periods of time is absolutely cruel. He talks about how he did it for a couple of weeks, and being able to count down saves your mind. But this guy Assange has been in there, and who knows how long he'll be in there for. Well, it could be forever,
Yep.
until he passes away, or whatever they decide to do with him. Maybe they'll John McAfee him in the UK prison. But let's get into the extremist content. Well, I got this. I don't know if you did, but I'm sure I
Did.
would guess over 2/3 of our listeners got this notification on Facebook saying that you've been exposed to extremist content, and then they give you a little get support thing, which leads you to more information about how you can cleanse your mind of impure thoughts. So tell us about what happened here, Will.
Yeah, I don't have a ton on this one, but like I guess it is kind of par for the course for Facebook. But I just found this one extra particularly creepy, and like nobody has any idea what the hell this means or why they're getting them. Like what triggered them to pop up? Because it was not everyone. I didn't get one. It was only certain users. Like I saw tons of my friends sharing screenshots of these things. But I found it weird that I didn't get one myself because like I am constantly exposed to literal extremist content. Like not just our type of like radical libertarian friends, but like revolutionary commies and jihadist groups, and like I'm sure the same goes for you. And anyone who does kind of the stuff that we do, covering politics and radical politics and war and all that, like we brush up with some extremist content. But Facebook apparently is only concerned about some people viewing this stuff. It's really not clear like what basis they're sending these to people on. Um, but it did kind of look like almost like they're trying to get people to like inform on their friends and family or something. Like use Facebook as like a snitching device to report any wrong think that they might see on there. Um, and like you said, they offered like links to support resources and all this stuff. And Facebook itself doesn't come right out and say that they're singling out any particular group in all this. They act like they're just like, this is just a neutral concern for any kind of generic extremism. However, you'll notice that a lot of the resources that they have are talking about hatred toward immigrants and minorities. And it turns out that Facebook has also partnered up with this NGO called Life After Hate, which is solely specifically devoted to opposing right wing extremism. So really, they're asking like, are your friends or family like too right wing? That's what this is really all about. You can tell by going through those support links and the stuff they're talking about. It's very, clearly implying that it's a certain type of extremism they're talking about. And then the NGO they partnered up with is specifically, if you go and read their like material, it's all about right wing extremism. So this isn't about like Islamic terrorism or something, which I guess you could call that right wing, but it's certainly not about any kind of left wing radicalism or any insurrectionary movements or thought on that side of the political spectrum. They are honing in on right wingers with this, so it seems.
Yeah.
Um,
I believe I got both of these notifications, well, one day after the next. And I was just looking. I got about 3,000 Facebook friends, and we have 500 and something mutuals. And
yeah,
so it's interesting that I would, because I assume that our mutual friends are the, fans of the show slash the libertarian community. And so
yeah.
it's interesting that apparently someone I know. I found the one that said, "Are you concerned that someone you know is becoming an extremist?" a little bit more disturbing than the other one. The
Yeah.
the other one that you may have been exposed to extremist content seemed like kind of just the kind of old COVID stuff. Like you might have been exposed to misinformation. Here's what we say is the truth about the situation.
Right.
And so it is, creepy as it is, and you're rightfully pointing out that when I did click on all the things that you could click on, just to see what they were saying, not because I plan on snitching on anyone, but anyways, I noticed that it was pretty clearly right wing groups, an American right wing, what you would think like any kind of white group is kind of what they were targeting, I think. And I maybe even that's too much of a simplification, because like there's a lot of people of color in the Proud Boys movement, which but they all lump it in with the same right wing stuff. And then yeah, so that was pretty concerning. And then the one trying to get people to snitch on people about on Facebook is absolutely crazy. And I'm sure this information will be shared with the government, will, because I believe that NGO you were talking about received a significant amount of funding from the Department of Homeland Security.
That's correct. Yeah, they got some kind of grant to combat domestic terrorism. I think last year, but definitely within the last couple of years.
Yeah, so this is a U.S. government program, then, right? If libertarians would be the most, and rightfully so, and I think a lot more people would probably be outraged too, if it was the Department of Homeland Security putting notifications on Facebook about, are you an extremist? Have you been exposed to an extremist? But because they do it through like these two layers of cloaking, the NGO, and then they fund the NGO through a grant, and then this is really Facebook. Facebook isn't saying this is the NGO. It's crazy how much influence the government gets to have, and nobody actually sees it.
Yeah, yeah. I found these overall very creepy. I think I agree that the one that's asking, does anyone are they becoming an extremist? That is a little bit creepier because it's kind of like going on a fishing expedition. Like maybe you know someone. Like go ahead and tell us what you know. Whereas before the other one, like maybe Facebook knows that you were exposed to some kind of thing that it considers. So like that one I could see being a little less creepy. But just trying to go on a fishing expedition to get you to snitch out your right wing uncle or something, I think is very creepy and disturbing.
Right, and with the connections to the Department of Homeland Security,
Yes.
I can only assume that that means that that whoever gets report to Facebook, that information probably gets passed along to the government. And
Sure.
it's probably good to remind people that as much as we should speak out against all the evils that our government does, there's probably a tactful way. Sometimes misspelling words can be useful, intentionally misspelling words or doing weird stuff like that. Sometimes it's okay to talk in a little bit of code, just because, be aware that anybody who you accept to be your Facebook friend could report you to the Gestapo.
Sure.
That's a real situation that we're looking at right here, and it's kind of a joke, but at the same time, it's pretty disturbing, and something we all should remember as we move forward here, where the social media giants are teaming up with the government to combat it and to enforce the propaganda narrative. Well,
Yeah.
I want to know, while we are just on this subject real quick, that they say they're finally removing the fencing from the Capitol, which I was pretty shocked about, because I thought they were all in firm belief that Donald Trump was going to try to inaugurate himself in August. So, um,
Yeah.
setting themselves up for another cat. No, I'm just joking. But
Too soon.
yeah, the fencing may finally be coming down. But I understand they will be getting funding for the portable retractable fencing that they want to put up, and
Yeah.
so I'm guessing anytime they want to put up fencing, they can. And I don't know. Will, this doesn't sound to me like the actions of a democratic body, of a republic during its height. It sounds like the actions of autocrats, as they fight for their little fiefdoms, and the people get poor enough to start to turn their hatred towards the capital.
Right. The barbarian hordes. They are the people.
Right. All right. Well, let's talk about Donald Rumsfeld, who is now, thankfully for the rest of us, dead. Now, I really am not one of these guys that likes to just meme in a way to insult the legacy of even war criminals like Donald Rumsfeld or John McCain. But that being said, all these media outlets are just puffing up and glorifying his legacy, and this man was an absolute monster, and that story must be told. So, Will,
Yeah.
tell us about how horrible Donald Rumsfeld is.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like at least he finally did one good thing, in his career here in kicking the bucket. He actually died on my birthday too, so it's a very apt situation here. Yeah, so Rumsfeld, there's a lot we could say about him. He has a very long career. He served in several different administrations, starting with Nixon. I think his main claim to fame, though, was serving as defense secretary under George W. Bush and helping to kick off the war on terror after the 9/11 attacks. Um, if you want like a really good long form treatment of Rumsfeld and his career, I would highly recommend Andrew Coburn's great book Rumsfeld: His Rise, Fall, and Catastrophic Legacy, gives you some idea of what his treatment will be. However, I think for our purposes, I think we can kind of summarize him with one story that ran in Politico back in 2016, and the story is called "What Rumsfeld Knew We Didn't Know About Iraq," which kind of plays off of his famous known unknowns shtick, that his whole line there. But the story is about how, as defense secretary, Donald Rumsfeld had the Joint Chiefs of Staff put together a report on the status of Iraq's WMD programs, and this is in 2002. So this is still well before the invasion, the year later. Um, And this report found that U.S. intelligence knew virtually nothing about Iraqi WMD, and that like 90% of the information they had was based on, quote, imprecise intelligence. And they admit that their evidence was shoddy in virtually every area, on nuclear, biological, chemical. They don't know the locations of facilities. They don't know the amount of materials that they have or the amount of weapons produced. Nothing. They know nothing about the Iraqi WMD program, alleged WMD program. And this is damning to the administration's case for war, because at the time, Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and Rice and all of them were saying with a lot of confidence that like we have evidence that Iraq has accelerated its WMD programs, and saying that Saddam could soon, supply terrorists with weapons for another 9/11 style attack. What did Rice say? The first sign of a smoking gun could be a mushroom cloud. This is the kind of stuff they were saying at the time. Yet this report, which would have debunked all of that, that Rumsfeld had ordered, it was never shared beyond a few people, like top people in the military and in the Joint Chiefs, including, of course, Rumsfeld himself. It was declassified later in 2011, but obviously that's way too late to make any difference to the drive for war. And instead of like sharing this or publicizing it, somebody who has any integrity whatsoever would have made this public immediately and said, like had some senator read it into the congressional record or something, the way that the now late Mike Gravel did with the Pentagon Papers. Instead, Rumsfeld and his lackeys at the Pentagon, including people like Paul Wolfowitz, they set up this parallel intelligence shop in the Pentagon called the Office of Special Plans. And the Office of Special Plans heavily relied on claims from Iraqi defectors, specifically this guy named Ahmed Chalabi and his group, the Iraqi National Congress. They basically, the Office of Special Plans worked out of the Pentagon, basically digging through the CIA's trash can, taking all these little tidbits of intelligence that had never been verified, and taking these claims from Iraqi defectors and trying to like weave them into a case for war. And so, for example, Judith Miller's infamous September 2002 article in the New York Times, Hussein intensifies quest for A-bomb parts, which is the story that talked about how Saddam was trying to buy a bunch of aluminum tubes to build uranium centrifuges. That entire story is based on anonymous Bush officials and, quote, Iraqi defectors. And all of this was coordinated by the Office of Special Plans and the Iraqi National Congress. This is the shop that Rumsfeld helped to set up. And so, all of Bush's senior cabinet people took this New York Times story to every Sunday morning talk show and cited it as independent verification of their claims, even though all of it traces back to the exact same source. They're just like laundering this baseless allegations through several channels to make it look legit. And so this was Rumsfeld's MO. He commissioned this report that had clearly found no evidence to support their WMD claims. And instead of publicizing that, he does this and helps to build the Office of Special Plans to lie our country into a war that we're still not out of, that's still going on, that's killed more than 1 million people. So that is, I think, Rumsfeld's legacy.
Well, thank you so much for that. And it's so important to remember who this man was and what he endorsed and how central his role was into getting the U.S. into the Iraq War. And who knows if there was a Secretary of Defense who didn't want to see 1 million Iraqis dead, then maybe we wouldn't have gone and fought that war. The intelligence that he created, the fear that he drummed up among the American people was critical to this happening. So I will say that in the movie Vice, Steve Carell plays Rumsfeld, and I think makes him look like pretty much a fool. Almost too much of a character that it lets Rumsfeld off the hook a little bit. But that's Steve Carell, and it's a Hollywood movie. You got an hour and a half to tell the story. But this is a man that doesn't care about torture. That Bad Daddy was a part of the monster created in his Iraqi torture prisons. This guy is responsible for ISIS in part. That should be the legacy of Donald Rumsfeld. And I only hope that he has to sit there in hell and listen to Saddam Hussein read his romance novel over and over again. That seems like a fitting eternity for Mr. Rumsfeld. So, Will, anything
Perfect.
else on the Grim Reaper of Iraq?
No, like I said, I think if people really want like a good long form treatment, check out the Coburn book, Rumsfeld: His Rise, Fall, and Catastrophic Legacy. It's a really good summary of his whole career there. But yeah, I think for our next story, it's one back at home, and it's one of these things that seems almost like too evil and egregious to be true. But it seems that in this case it happened, and I guess it's not totally shocking given what we know and talk about the criminal justice system often. But there's this 76-year-old woman in Baltimore. who you know what, I'll actually just let you tell the story. I won't spoil the I don't want to call it the punchline, but like the really egregious part of this. Tell us what happened to this old lady.
Yeah, so she's 76 years old. She's, first of all, a victim of the drug war. She was, at the age of 60, sentenced to a 24-year sentence for apparently dealing heroin. I don't know if the allegations are true, but I mean, if you're a 60-year-old heroin dealer, like, you know, this lady this lady's had a life, right? But she's in jail. She does 16 years, and then last summer at the age of 76, she's one of the fortunate people who were able to get out of the prison, to be able to, you know, serve a you know, home confinement sentence rather than be in the prison. Because of her age, because of COVID, she's able to get out. It seems another really fortunate thing will happens here is that she's able to move in with her 94-year-old mother. And I'm sure, you know, during COVID, having your daughter with you was probably a huge assistance. And you know, it's a major loss now that unfortunately Miss Levi's been returned to prison. So it seems that on June 12th she attended a computer word processing class in Baltimore's Inner Harbor, and when she did that, she was out of contact with her equivalent of a parole officer. I think they use a different term, for a few hours, and now she's back in jail, awaiting transfer. And you know, we're getting a lot of information from her lawyer. Will, I mean, this is absolutely unbelievable. The lady goes to college, and you know, it seems that they knew because she was on a monitoring system, so you know, they could confirm that's where she went. There's no question that, you know, oh, maybe she was out like robbing a bank or like, you know, having heroin. No, they know she went there, she went back home, and she's now, you know, going back to jail. And this is what we want our tax money spent on, sending 76-year-old women to jail. Honestly, if you're a 76-year-old woman, short of, you know, being a murderer or a rapist, like, just let them out of jail. Like, you know, I mean, like 50 years ago she robbed a bank, okay, let her out. Like, she's not gonna rob another bank. She's 76
Right.
years old, you know. But this is our justice system. They throw her back in jail, and one of the reasons I want to talk about this, Will, is because I have a somewhat similar experience about how trivial and stupid the home confinement house arrest system is. When I was first out of college, I was doing something along the lines of like social worker. I was helping a young man who had schizophrenia, who had a low IQ, and he was, it turned out, wrongly accused. You know, once they interviewed witnesses, they found out, but he was wrongly accused of starting a house fire, and so they sent him first to jail, and then they let him out under house arrest. And during the 9 months they had him under house arrest, at one point apparently he went outside his house that night and wandered around. Nobody had any idea about this until 4 years later, or not 4 years, 4 days later, when I'm sitting in, you know, his weekly parole meeting with him and his PO. And as we're about to leave, she's like, "You're doing a great job. Everything's going well." She's like, you know, just scrolling through his GPS tracker data, and is like, "Oh my God, you were out walking around last night. We have to rearrest you."
Damn.
How stupid is that? He you know, technically violated this thing, but what's even the point of the GPS tracker if it, you know, people aren't monitoring it, or if it doesn't go off? You know, I think everybody thinks of that movie that was a ripoff of Rear Window, where, you know, the kid like has to put the like string around his front yard, and if he ventures outside of it, it goes off and the police come.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's not what happens here. It's, you know, just something that they could use. So you know, kid's having a rough night, he needs to go walk around to clear his head. You know, imagine being stuck in a house with, you know, just as a teenager, you know, in 19, 20 years old, being stuck in the house with like your family, that's gotta be rough all the time, right? So he goes for a little walk and he ends up back in jail. And yeah, it's just this whole system is arbitrary and stupid. Not to mention, this costs a lot of money. I'm sure that this lady was paying a couple $100 a month, if not a week, to be out of prison on the home monitoring system.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it turned out that he didn't do it, and you know, the I think the city was kind of embarrassed about what they handled it, and so they waived his fees. But he had wrapped up a few $1,000s in fees.
Damn.
Again, he was out of jail for a crime he didn't commit. So
Yeah, it's just very, like you said, I think the word arbitrary is a very good term for this. There was one quote that's really stood out to me from this Levi woman's lawyer, where she said, quote, "There's no question she was in class. As I was told, because she could have been robbing a bank, they're going to treat her as if she was robbing a bank." So during that small window of time, they couldn't get a hold of her. So that's what they're going to assume. That's how the system works. This 76-year-old woman was in college trying to better her life, and they're going to treat her as if she was trying to rob a bank. So that is sort of the system we're working under here,
Right.
living
Well,
under.
and well, I just wanted to like say it seemed like she was in like a pretty basic computer class. Like if
Right.
she's like trying to apply for a job or apply for a house, like this may be something that she needs to do. Like get a new apartment. Like she
Right.
may need like to go to a class to get this skill. Everybody's like, oh, what are we gonna do about the homeless problem all the time? Well, part of the reason you have a homeless problem is because the justice system is so messed up. It makes it so that there's actually people that can't figure out how to get an apartment and fill out a form online because they
Right.
can't leave their house to go learn how to do that.
That's right.
This is just, I don't know, one of the absolute terrible things that happens because of our justice system. Anyways, Will, in the land of the free, home of the brave, on this Independence Day, I suppose we should sign off here.
Yep.
Obviously, the arbitrary detentions of Assange and other heroes like Chelsea Manning in the past or Ross Ulbricht are going to continue. Why Donald Rumsfeld gets to live out his old age peacefully,
Right. Eddie
and
Gallagher.
the Gallagher as well. So, anyways, what else you got? Well, if not, let's sign off.
Yeah. So if people want to find, I'm a staff writer at RT. If people want to find the stuff I write, the best way to do that is to check my Twitter handle, where I collect it all there. You can find that at the Will Porter.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And we'll be back with more shows this week.
All right. Thanks, Cal. Bye, everybody.